Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Greg always believed he knew his wife better than anyone else in the world. 15 years of marriage should have meant something. They should have created a deep, unshakable bond between two people. He remembered perfectly the day he met Vanessa at the university library, both of them in their 20s, her hair pulled back in a messy bun as she studied anatomy for her physical education classes, him carrying heavy books on structural engineering. Her first smile had lit up something inside him that he thought would never fade, or at least that's what Greg believed until that Thursday night that would change everything forever. Their life in Denver was exactly what Greg had always dreamed of. A two-story house in a quiet neighborhood where kids still played in the streets until dusk, two beautiful daughters who were the center of his universe, and a wife who seemed to have everything under control. Vanessa had built a solid career as a yoga instructor, first at local studios and then opening her own space 3 years ago. Greg worked for a respected civil engineering firm, handling infrastructure projects that kept the family comfortable without extravagance. Lily was 13 and in that tricky phase of adolescence, torn between the little girl who still wanted to watch cartoons with her dad and the young woman who spent hours in her room listening to melancholy songs. Sophie, at 9, was pure energy and joy, always dancing around the house and making everyone laugh with her silly jokes. But in recent weeks, something had changed. Greg couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, he just knew something felt off. Vanessa seemed physically present but absent in every other way. She answered his questions with one-word replies, spent more time on her phone than looking at him, and whenever he tried to initiate physical closeness, she'd come up with excuses about being tired or having a headache. Greg tried to convince himself it was just a phase, that every marriage went through times like this, but the insecurity grew like a shadow in his chest. That Thursday started like any other. Greg left for work at 7 in the morning, Vanessa dropped the girls off at school and then headed to her yoga studio. The day unfolded normally until they all gathered for dinner at 6:30 that evening. Vanessa had made roasted chicken with vegetables, one of the family's favorite meals. Lily was chattering about a science project, Sophie was trying to convince her parents to let her get a hamster, and everything seemed perfectly normal on the surface. That's when Greg, on an impulse he couldn't fully explain, asked the question that would blow everything apart. "Do you still love me?" The words slipped out before he could think better of them. The silence that followed was so thick even the girls stopped talking. Vanessa froze with her fork in midair, suspended for a second that felt like an eternity. Then she laughed. It wasn't a natural, warm, or comforting laugh. It was strange, almost nervous, forced, as if Greg had asked something absurd or inappropriate. "Of course I do," she finally replied, but her tone was mechanical, automatic, with no real emotion behind the words. She quickly changed the subject, asking Sophie about the hamster, but the damage was already done. Greg stayed awake all night. Lying next to Vanessa, who was either sleeping deeply or pretending to, he replayed that moment over and over in his mind. The laugh. The tone of her voice. The way she'd looked away. Every detail screamed that something was terribly wrong. He thought about all the small changes he'd noticed in recent weeks, the extra weekend trips to the studio, the text messages she hid by flipping her phone screen down whenever he entered the room, the new lingerie he'd found in her drawer, pieces she'd never worn with him. How had he been so blind? When the alarm went off at 6 in the morning, Greg had already made up his mind. He wasn't going to spend another day in ignorance. He got ready for work as usual, kissed the girls who were still half asleep, and told Vanessa he had an important meeting and would be home late. She barely looked at him, just nodded while making coffee. Greg left, got in the car, drove to the end of the street, and parked. He waited 30 minutes until he saw Vanessa's car pass by, taking the girls to school. Then he turned around and went back home. He slipped in quietly through the back door, the one that led to the laundry room and that they rarely locked. The house was silent. Greg climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking softly under his weight. He didn't know exactly what he expected to find, but he needed something, anything, that would confirm or deny the suspicions eating away at his peace. That's when he heard her voice coming from the living room. Vanessa was on the phone, and her tone was completely different from anything Greg had heard in months. She was whispering, but there was an intimacy, a tenderness that used to be reserved just for him. Greg crept closer, staying out of her line of sight. He pulled his phone from his pocket and started recording. I know, Vanessa was saying. It's only a matter of time. He doesn't suspect anything yet, but even if he does, what's he going to do? Greg is too predictable. A pause as she listened to whoever was on the other end. Of course I think about our future together. It's all I've been thinking about lately. When he finally finds out, I'll be straightforward. I won't pretend I want to fix things. It's long past time I was truly happy. Another pause. I love you too, Blake. See you at 3, at our usual spot. Greg felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. Blake. The name echoed in his mind. Blake, the personal trainer at the gym where Vanessa worked, the young, muscular guy she'd casually mentioned from time to time, always in the context of some funny story from the studio. Greg had always assumed Blake was just part of the scenery, another superficial acquaintance in her life. Never, not for a single second, had he imagined that name carried so much weight, so much betrayal. He waited until he heard Vanessa hang up the phone, then walked into the living room. She was turned away, putting her phone into her bag, still unaware he was there. Vanessa. His voice came out steadier than he expected. She spun around quickly, eyes wide with surprise and something that looked like fear. Greg. What are you doing here? I thought you had a meeting. I also thought you were faithful. Seems we were both mistaken. Greg held up his phone, showing her it was recording. Vanessa's face cycled through a series of expressions in seconds: shock, fear, anger, and finally something that looked like defiance. You recorded me? That's an invasion of privacy. Invasion of privacy? Greg let out a bitter laugh. You're having an affair with Blake and you're talking about invasion of privacy? How long, Vanessa? How long have you been cheating on me? At first, she tried to deny it, saying he was misinterpreting things, that it was just a conversation between friends, but Greg wasn't buying any more lies. Don't insult me by being even more dishonest than you already have been. I heard every word. Our future together. He doesn't suspect anything. You love me too. Want me to repeat it back to you? His voice was rising, years of bottled-up anger finally finding an outlet. Vanessa realized there was no way out. She sat down on the couch, her shoulders slumping in defeat. 8 months, she said quietly. It started 8 months ago. 8 months. Greg quickly did the math in his head. 8 months ago was when Vanessa had insisted on redecorating the studio, when she'd started spending more weekends there, when she'd stopped wanting him to visit her at work. It all made sense now, every piece of the puzzle clicking into place with painful clarity. Why? Greg needed to know, even though he knew no answer would ever be enough. We have a family, Vanessa. 2 daughters who adore you. 15 years together. Why throw all that away? Vanessa looked at him with an expression Greg had never seen before, a mix of pity and coldness. Because I'm not happy, Greg. I haven't been happy for years. Blake makes me feel alive again. He's spontaneous, passionate, everything you're not anymore. You're predictable, Greg. Predictable and boring. Those words cut deeper than any confession of infidelity ever could. Greg felt something break inside him, not just his heart, but something fundamental about who he thought he was. He'd built his entire life around being reliable, stable, present. And now the woman he loved was saying those very qualities were what pushed her away. But then something worse happened. During the increasingly heated argument that followed, as Greg demanded details and Vanessa swung between defense and attack, she let slip something that would change everything in a way even she hadn't foreseen. "You want to know everything, Greg? Do you really want to know everything?" She was shouting now, angry tears streaming down her face. "I'm not even sure Sophie is your daughter. Have you ever thought about that?" The world stopped. Greg felt the floor literally drop out from under him. Sophie. His Sophie. The bright-eyed girl with the contagious laugh. The child who called him Daddy with so much love it melted his heart every time. "What did you say?" His voice was strangely calm now, a disturbing contrast to the chaos that had filled the room just seconds earlier. Vanessa seemed to realize she'd gone too far. "I didn't mean that. I was angry. Of course Sophie is yours." But the damage was done. Doubt had been planted, and no retraction could erase it. Greg grabbed the car keys. "We're settling this now." He called a private clinic that offered fast paternity testing. They could see them in 2 hours. Vanessa tried to argue, saying it wasn't necessary, that she'd spoken in the heat of the moment, but Greg was unmoved. "Either you come with me now, or I file for divorce today and request the test through the court. Your choice." The next 2 hours were the longest of Greg's life. They picked the girls up from school, making up an excuse about a last-minute medical appointment. In the car, Lily sensed the tension and stayed quiet, but Sophie chattered happily, completely unaware that her entire life was about to be called into question. At the clinic, the process was quick and painless, just a cheek swab from each of them. The technician explained the results would be ready in 3 to 5 business days. Greg took the girls back to school and then went to work, unable to return to that house where everything now felt like a lie. Vanessa sent dozens of messages throughout the rest of the day, alternating between pleas for forgiveness and accusations that he was being dramatic. Greg didn't reply to any of them. That night, he slept in his office, texting the girls that he had an urgent project and would be working late. The next 5 days were a hell of uncertainty. Greg returned home because he couldn't abandon the girls, but he barely spoke to Vanessa. They slept in separate rooms, he in the guest bedroom. Lily knew something was wrong but didn't ask, perhaps afraid of the answer. Sophie remained Sophie, radiant and innocent. Every time Greg looked at her, his heart broke a little more. He loved her so deeply, so completely, that the possibility she wasn't his biological daughter felt impossible to process. On the morning of the 5th day, Greg was at his office when he received the email from the clinic. The digital envelope sat there, waiting to be opened, carrying information that could either destroy or salvage what was left of his sanity. He waited until everyone left for lunch, locked the door, and opened the file with trembling hands. Probability of paternity, 0%. The words blurred on the screen. Greg read it again. And again. Sophie wasn't his biological daughter. The pain that followed was unlike anything he'd ever experienced, physical, visceral, as if someone had ripped out a vital piece of him. Greg left the office and went straight to the lawyer he'd consulted days earlier. He brought the phone recording and the DNA results. The lawyer, an experienced man named Herbert, looked at Greg with genuine compassion. "Greg," Herbert began carefully, "you've been on Sophie's birth certificate for 9 years. Legally, you're her father. A DNA test doesn't automatically change that. You have the presumption of paternity. If you want to keep your rights to Sophie, you can. And I strongly recommend that you do." Greg hadn't considered that. He'd been so consumed by the pain of biological betrayal that he hadn't realized the law might be on his side. "But she's not my blood daughter," he said, his voice breaking. "She's your daughter in every way that matters legally and emotionally," Herbert replied firmly. "You've raised her since birth. You're the only father she's ever known. Unless you voluntarily give up paternity, no court is going to take her from you without a major fight. And based on what you've told me about Vanessa, you have an excellent chance of getting primary custody. But Greg needed to know who the biological father was. The lawyer suggested genetic ancestry testing, services like 23andMe and Ancestry DNA. If you can get Vanessa's consent to test Sophie on one of those platforms, and if the biological father has also done a test there, you might find him. Lots of people discover unknown relatives exactly that way. Reluctantly, Vanessa agreed. Greg sent a DNA sample from Sophie to 3 different services. 2 months later, there was a match. A man named Vincent, 38 years old and living in Boulder, had done an ancestry test the previous year. The system identified him as Sophie's likely father with 99.9% probability. Vincent was completely shocked. He vaguely remembered Vanessa from a wellness conference in Las Vegas about 10 years ago. There'd been a night of drinks and a casual encounter, but he'd never known it had resulted in a pregnancy. Vanessa had been married at the time, and Vincent had assumed any child would be her husband's. He had his own life now, he was engaged and planning to marry in 6 months. He'd never had children, and now learning he had a 9-year-old daughter was turning his world upside down. Greg arranged what he called an important family meeting for a Saturday. He invited Vanessa's parents, her 2 brothers with their families, and his own parents too. He said it was about the family's future and that it was crucial everyone be there. He also invited Blake, sending a message from Vanessa's phone while she slept, saying it was time for him to officially meet the family. Vincent was invited as well. Saturday arrived. The living room was full, everyone chatting with the cheerful, curious tone of people who had no idea what was coming. Vanessa was visibly nervous. When Blake showed up at the door, confusion spread through the room. Vanessa turned pale. Blake looked just as lost. Vincent arrived minutes later. Greg closed the door and stood in the center of the room. "Thank you all for coming. I know you're confused, but it'll all make sense soon." He began calmly, explaining that he discovered Vanessa had been having an affair for 8 months. He connected his laptop to the TV and played the recording from that morning, Vanessa's voice filling the room with words of love for Blake, words of disdain for Greg. The silence was absolute. Vanessa's mother started crying. Her father stood up, his face red with anger and shame. But Greg wasn't finished. He then displayed the paternity test results on the screen. And for those wondering, yes, she went beyond emotional and physical betrayal. "Sophie isn't my biological daughter." Shouts erupted from several directions at once. Blake, who had promised Vanessa they'd face everything together, simply walked out of the room. Greg heard him start his car and drive away. Vanessa ran after him, screaming his name, but he was already gone. Greg then turned to Vincent. "This is Vincent. Through DNA ancestry testing, I discovered he's Sophie's biological father. He didn't know she existed until 2 weeks ago." The revelation added another layer of shock to the room. Vanessa's father confronted her with a coldness Greg had never seen. "You destroyed your family for what? For a man who didn't even have the courage to stay? How could you do this?" In the months that followed, Greg's life became a complex legal battle. His lawyer made it clear that Greg had full legal rights to Sophie. He was on the birth certificate, had acted as her father since birth, and had the presumption of paternity. Vincent didn't automatically gain rights just by being the biological father. The divorce proceedings drew local attention. Greg was awarded primary physical custody of both girls. Vanessa lost her yoga studio as clients began canceling en masse. Blake blocked Vanessa completely. She ended up in a small apartment, working as a receptionist at a gym. As for Vincent, after discussions with family therapists, it was decided he could get to know Sophie gradually, without pressure or immediate expectations. Greg didn't stand in the way. He recognized that Sophie deserved to know her full biological history when she was ready. Vincent started with occasional supervised visits, just for coffee or ice cream, initially introduced as a friend of Daddy's. A year after that devastating family confrontation, Greg was in a very different place. He'd started therapy, not just for himself but also for Lily and Sophie. He and Lily had developed an even stronger bond. For Sophie, Greg remained simply Daddy. Legally, emotionally, and in every way that mattered. The court had affirmed his legal paternity. Vincent remained a peripheral presence, respecting the boundaries that had been set. There were moments when Greg wondered if he could have done something differently. But his therapist helped him understand that the betrayal was about Vanessa's choices, not his failures as a husband or father. He'd been exactly what he'd promised to be, faithful, present, dedicated. The house had a different tone now, quieter, but also more honest. Greg didn't hide his pain from Lily, but he also didn't let it define who they were becoming. They talked openly about feelings, about betrayal, about forgiveness, and about how to move forward without carrying bitterness. Vanessa tried to reconnect with Greg a few times, sending long messages about regret. But Greg had learned a crucial lesson: some bridges, once burned, shouldn't be rebuilt. He replied just once, "I asked if you loved me because I felt something was wrong. You laughed. That laugh told me everything I needed to know. There's no going back. But thank you for giving me the two best things in my life, my daughters. They'll always have a father who loves them unconditionally." On the second anniversary of the revelation, Greg was sitting in his backyard watching Lily practice volleyball with some friends. Sophie was there too, laughing and trying to keep up with the older girls. Vincent had stopped by earlier that morning to drop off a birthday gift for Sophie and then quietly left. It was an unusual arrangement, but it worked. The pain of everything that had happened was still there, probably always would be, at some level, but it was no longer paralyzing. Greg had rebuilt his life in a way that honored who he truly was. His daughters, both of them, knew they could count on him unconditionally. Vanessa had taken a lot from him: his trust, his marriage, even his certainty about his own fatherhood. But she hadn't taken the most important things: his capacity to love, his integrity, and his determination to be a man his daughters could admire. Vanessa's strange laugh that Thursday night still echoed in Greg's memory sometimes. But now, instead of pain, he felt something close to gratitude. That fake laugh had been the catalyst that freed him from a life built on lies. It had hurt terribly to uncover the truth, but living in ignorance would have been worse. And as Greg watched his daughters play under the afternoon sun, he knew he'd done the right thing. He'd faced the truth when it would have been easier to look away. He'd fought for his rights as a father when many would have given up upon learning the biological truth. He'd chosen dignity over convenience, and love over genetics. Vanessa might have laughed at that question about love, but Greg had the last word. He'd walked away from that broken marriage not as a victim, but as a survivor, stronger and more aware of his own worth. Most importantly, he'd kept his daughters, both of them, because he understood that being a father was about presence and love, not just DNA. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.